Freedom, freedom, freedom. Sometimes I feel...
Welcome to Talk of the Bay. I'm Christine Barrington. Today is Juneteenth. Whether you call it Emancipation Day, Freedom Day, or the country's second Independence Day, Juneteenth is one of the most important anniversaries in our nation's history. It commemorates the end of the legal right to enslave other human beings and points toward the promise of freedom for all people. Unfortunately, while slavery was formally ended by the Emancipation Proclamation, the racist mindset that fed the practice has remained tenaciously embedded within our culture, and the struggle to create true racial justice in America has largely fallen on the shoulders of Black people. Lately, though, the explicit call to white Americans to step forward and recognize their stake in extricating racism has been growing. One organization that has embraced this call is known as SURJ, Stand Up for Racial Justice. With 200 chapters across the United States, SURJ calls itself home for white people working for social justice, and my guests tonight belong to SURJ in Santa Cruz and San Jose, and they will help share with us its vision and its programs. My first guest, Kathy Lass, is a retired programmer and data analyst living in Aptos for the past 3 years after spending most of her life in the greater San Francisco Bay Area. She's been involved with SURJ Santa Cruz County for the past year and with SURJ in general for the last 4 years. Kathy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Our next guest, Angelee Dion, as soon as she gets on the phone, has been organizing with SURJ Santa Cruz for 3.5 years. After attending an anti-racist book circle at the Resource Center for Nonviolence, she wanted to do something more tangible locally. Working with SURJ has fulfilled that desire by both learning about and supporting local person of colors-led organizations and meeting many more white folks who care deeply about racial justice. So she'll be with us in just a minute. Our next guest is Lori Katcher. Lori's been organizing for racial justice with SURJ at Sacred Heart in San Jose since July 2020. She is a mother and caregiver for family. She loves dancing and is learning how to participate more deeply in community through SURJ's work with local POC-led organizations. So when the acronym POC is people of color, right?
Yes.
So POC-led organizations and with neighborhood hands. Lori, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And Nora Larson has been organizing with SURJ at Sacred Heart in San Jose since October 2020. She is a mother and a middle school English teacher and lives in San Jose, California. Nora, thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
All right. So I thought a really great way to start would be to have a little introduction in the words of the national co-founder of SURJ, Pam McMichael. This is a video from SURJ's website, and she just gives a beautiful introduction about how this really powerful organization began.
As some of you may know, SURJ started in 2009 in the context of the backlash against the first Black president. Our work wasn't about Obama per se, but about what that backlash meant. It was brutal, it was nasty, it was virulent, and it was, of course, race-based, and it was well-funded. Some were unprepared for that backlash, thinking that the election meant we were post-racial, but not many Southerners thought that. So it's no accident that while SURJ came out from people across the country and conversations across the country, it was kicked into motion by Southerners. And I know from where I sat at the Highlander Center, as with others as well, we were literally hearing and seeing the question from people of color, what are white people doing to step up? The move to come together and end up forming a national organization and network was our answer to the question. The question of what are we doing is not really about what we're doing. It's about what are we going to do. It's a challenge to do more. It was about stepping up to our responsibility as white people to do what the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which Carla will talk more about, to go get our own because that's where racism lives. And justice for Black people, for all people of color, for any of us, was not going to happen without getting more white people involved to build the power needed to undermine white supremacy and build a racially just society.
So that was a very powerful introduction from Pam McMichael, and I do believe we have our fourth guest. You there, Angelee?
Yes, I am.
Okay, welcome to Talk of the Bay. And so I think you just heard the end of that introduction by Pam McMichael to the origins of SURJ. And so now I'd like to open it up to the four of you to reflect on and share anything else that you know and understand about how SURJ began. I, for one, was, I shouldn't say I was surprised to learn that SURJ came right in the wake of the election of Obama. So that I found that very interesting. So, Lori, do you have anything you would like to add to what Pam said?
I think it is interesting as well. Christine, I agree. And I guess I would just add to what you said that we've seen that backlash again and again, that type of backlash. And it's something that I was unaware of as a younger person as well. We saw that type of backlash again on January 6th, at the January 6th insurrection. And so the work of racial justice is not in the least bit over. We have so much work to do. And I'm just grateful that for the founders of SURJ that they heeded the call of our Black community members to join in that multiracial movement.
Beautiful. So, Nora or Kathy or Angelee, do you want to add anything to what Pam shared about the beginnings of SURJ? We have a lot to talk about tonight, so don't feel obligated. Is there anything else you'd like to say about it?
I just want to echo that, and I also want to highlight that SURJ actually stands for showing up for racial justice.
I have it all wrong.
Not all,
showing up.
Not all wrong, but
Stand up.
there's a slight difference.
Yes.
Standing we've learned can be ableist, and so showing up is it can mean so many more things. Show up.
Okay, beautiful. Anything else?
Yeah,
Angelee?
I'll add something. Also, add something about the origins of SURJ. One of the things that the founders realized was that over and over again in our society, people in power pit the races against each other because we would be too powerful if we joined forces. And we realized that they're the people we really need to be going after. And so the elites try to make this divide between us. And one of the things that SURJ is doing in the South and in Appalachia, and really across the country, is to make people realize this and to go realize that it's better for all of our economies and in all of our well-being if we can meet each other as human beings and take out the race element of it. And so that's what they've been doing and what we're trying to do as well.
Beautiful. Thank you, Angelee. Nora, I kind of saw your head bobbing. Is there anything that you would like to add? Because this kind of naturally sort of goes into this question of why do we need white people? Why is this call explicitly going out? I think this is really important to talk about.
I can speak to that.
Okay.
So I'm a part of SURJ at Sacred Heart's Building the Movement team, and we're SURJ at Sacred Heart in San Jose and Santa Clara County because we're a part of Sacred Heart community service, which is trying to address poverty at the symptoms level and then also organizing people to address to be anti-poverty at the systems level. So there's different groups within Sacred Heart that are organizing. So what I wanted to speak to in what we heard in the clip was the idea of getting our own. So being a part of Building the Movement team really matters to me because I came to this work very recently in this way, did tiny things here and there, post this on social media, donate over here, go to that protest. But once I found SURJ and began to act consistently and locally in Santa Clara County, it really, because I mean, to be honest, I feel kind of new in it, and I can see my friends and family that are so close and so ready to actually take action. They have this view or this idea, and then I can speak to them about the things that SURJ is working on and say, here's something you can actually do right here locally, and it's meaningful. And we don't just have to talk about this and say this is terrible, or this, I hate that this is going on, or speak in this like vagueness. There's actually things that we can speak to people in power in Santa Clara County and San Jose, and call in our own. That's what I would say for why are white folks organizing. We're closest to the mindset that our friends and family have been in, because I mean, honestly, I was just there.
Yeah. What I love about what you just said, you said showing up locally, consistently, right? And in a way that's informed, because I find a lot of people suffer from what I call civic learned helplessness. I just say this everywhere. I'm like, it's not because most people are good-hearted and they want good things, and they are not overtly racist or any other ist, but there is something about our education system, there's something about our culture, and when you're bombarded with like these negative stories, and you're never really being shown like, here's a positive way to show up, here is how you could change it, this is what it looks like, and it has to happen over the long haul. When people don't have that positive way forward, they just shut down. So I see heads nodding, so I'm going to pivot. Kathy, is there anything why do white people need to engage in social justice work?
And so that minute, I just want to say the overwhelm is part of the, it adds to the cynicism.
Yes,
so,
it does. Yeah.
So that, the positive.
It's like a self-protective measure.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But so racism affects all of us.
It does.
So it's not just, and we're not helping other people. We're collaborating together to improve all of our lives together. We're not free until we're all free. And as Nora said, all of our networks still tend to be segregated. So
100%.
If Black people and people of color are fighting for this, we're not hearing them. They're not necessarily in our networks. We're not learning from them.
Right.
So I think that's another reason that we need to pull in our own.
Beautiful. And, when you say that, it reminds me of the context for how the show today with all of you came about. Mm. And I want to speak to it sensitively that, we had reached out to some leaders of color in the community, and they were like, well, this is our holiday. We want to be celebrating with our friends and our families. And then that got us thinking, okay, this is an opportunity for white people to come and speak to what needs to be done, while our citizens, our friends of color, like Tyree Ritchie, who is a fabulous local organizer right now, has the March for Love and Courage happening, starting at Depot Park and going to the London Nelson Center. So it's a very important holiday for citizens of color, and it should be for us too. And here at K-Squid, we're really wanting to mark this day by speaking to what white people not only can do, but what we need to do so we can live in a world that thrives and is alive. We have so much to gain. I see you nodding your head, Lori. Do you have...
Absolutely.
Sorry. We're going to, Angelee, did you want to say something since you're on the phone?
I'm sorry. I just wanted to jump in and say that Tyree Ritchie's march is tonight, and it's actually from the London Nelson Center to City Hall.
Thank you for that
Black Lives
correction.
Matter
Beautiful.
mural. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angelee. That's very good information.
Sure.
Okay. So, Lori, what did you want to say?
I agree with all of you, and I think that we all have the opportunity. We can take initiative to really dig into history here in our country and on our own. What we do know is that the systems that we have were created by white people for white people. And
for only certain white people,
yes.
Which is what Nora was pointing out earlier, right? The whole history of racism is like, how can we pit poor white people against,
yes,
right? Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah. And Angelee spoke to that as well.
Yeah.
So I think that when we as white people who, some of us, as you said, not all of us, but some of us white people benefit from the systems more than others. And we certainly have historically benefited from the way our systems are set up, whether it's government, whether it's education, than people of color, indigenous people as well. And so when white people come out and say, no, this is not the system we want, and join in that fight, then we can really gather people power that we need to change the systems.
I love that, gathering people power. And in case you've just tuned in, you are listening to KSQD. This is Talk of the Bay, and we're exploring the ideas and programs of the National Racial Justice Organization, SURJ, which stands for Showing Up for Racial Justice, which explicitly calls forward white people to actively work to transform the legacy of racism in America. So I have 4 guests with me here in the studio. They're members of SURJ, and we're going to be getting into what called each of them into this work. So I want to invite each of you to say what ignited this spirit of to engage and get involved and to become accountable to change the racism mindset and reality in this country. Would you like to just go ahead, Lori, and start?
Sure. I think for me, it actually was maybe I would call it a slow burn to get to the point of actually taking action. At the heart, I have a faith that believes in the dignity and belonging of every human being, and I think that's something that I gained as a very young child. However, I didn't begin to take action and local action until July of 2020. In 2017, I had an experience where a group of my son's high school football teammates, after much thought and careful preparation, decided to kneel for the national anthem at one of their football games. And the backlash was so incredibly disheartening for me as a mom of a high schooler who I wanted to have agency, and along with his peers to have agency in determining, the future and a just future for our nation. And I said something really ignorant after a community listening session. What I feel was ignorant. I said, after listening to students of color and their parents share their own personal experiences of racism, both on the campus and in their own neighborhoods, and I said, we have so much work to do. But then I was like, I have no idea what that work is. And so it wasn't until 2020, after the horrific murder of George Floyd, that I said, okay, for myself, enough's enough. I've got to make some changes. And I, through SURJ, learned what this work is. I learned about community organizing. I learned about how we can work as a multiracial movement to change local policy that benefits everyone, that benefits the most marginalized people in our communities. And that's how I got to this work.
Thank you. That's very powerful. Kathy, what called you to SURJ?
I echo the slow burn. My best friend in college was Black. We ended up being business partners later on in Los Angeles shortly after the riots. She told me, we would talk about race off and on, but she told me at one point, hey, Kathy, every single one of my Black male friends has been pulled over. You can't tell me, Kathy, that they all deserve that. But then fast forward a decade later, and with the murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson, and talking with my loved one who, smartest person I know, debating about policing being fair and being actually harmful, I finally saw the point. And then when Trump got elected, like to me, the main cause of that was racism and like the founding racism in our Constitution, even. And so when I had the chance, I retired early and started to look for ways to fight it, and found SURJ then.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Nora, how about you? What called you to SURJ?
Similarly, there was like all these little things, and then finding SURJ was the moment of, okay, here's how I can be consistent. Okay, here's the real work right now, right here in my city. I went to a Catholic high school, private Catholic high school. My parents value justice, but like, what did that really mean? You know what I mean? Like, it was sort of going through life. Okay, well, I'm not racist, or I don't believe that. I'm not doing anything actively to hurt anyone of color. And it was a very that personal thing. Going to college, becoming a teacher, I was exposed to ideas, the invisible knapsack of privilege, and sort of opened up to what my white privilege was. But to be honest, like, all the incidents of police brutality in the last 10 years, my husband and I would both like post on social media, this is so wrong, like do something for about 3 days. And then we would go back into that state of overwhelm or our comfortable lives. Our lead organizer at SURJ asked me to mention this metaphor that I had. Honestly, I felt a little bit like a zombie, a little bit like, or like on a hamster wheel. We are just living our lives, our comfortable lives. And, we can do the thing when there's this outlash and there's this media frenzy, and we can do that thing. But what are we really doing every day? And it was COVID. It was COVID that time slowing down, life slowing down, and the racial uprisings that made me say. And I have a daughter who was 2 at the beginning of COVID. Just cause us to think like, what really are we trying to model for our daughter, and what really are we doing to live this out consistently? Right. And I started, I found a random article and followed all these little, like a listicle, like here's 100 ways to show up for racial justice. And that was a start. And I found an accountability buddy, and we would text each other every week and say, here's what'd you do? But it was a lot of, I'm donating over here, I'm reading this article. Fast forward to October 2020 and going to a de-escalation training from another group, but someone in that session was with SURJ, and she said, you need to join us. And it's been transformative, honestly. And now I'm not religious, but I sort of think of it as like church. This is like the Beautiful. Way that the consistency of going to church every Sunday and practicing. Right. That is what I try to think about with SURJ and showing up for racial justice is, what am I doing in and day out now that I made this commitment? Like, I can't go back. Like that cognitive dissonance of like, I am saying this, but what am I actually doing to live up to that? And realizing I don't want to have that cognitive dissonance and model that for my daughter.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, because connecting with all of our citizens in this idea, until all of us are free, none of us are free, that is spirituality to me. And I love that. I mean, I grew up in church, and then I left church, and I've been looking for church ever since. So you might have just pointed me in a right direction. So Angelee, how did you connect with SURJ?
Well, about 6 years ago, they showed a film at my church called White Like Me, by a white anti-racist author, Tim Weiss. And it was after service, and about 30 of us got in this room and watched the film, and it was a mixed race group. And the film really laid out systemic racism in the U.S. In a way that I had never heard before. I had never understood that before. And it was shocking to me that I hadn't known this stuff. And I was dumbfounded that I was in my early 50s when I first, watched that film and found out. And then there was this immense sadness. After the film, we got put into small groups to talk about it, and I wound up in a group with two other women, and we had all spent time in the South or grown up in the South. And there was just such a sadness of, seeing the racism and seeing the injustice and the deceitfulness, to not talk about it and to keep it out of our history and all of that, that it just made me really want to do what I could, to okay, well, I've spent, the first so many years not knowing. I'm going to spend my final years trying to turn this around and in whatever way I can. And then, of course, George Floyd's murder kind of swept the globe, and I found a bunch of other people who wanted to do that too, and that was through SURJ.
Mm. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your stories. We've sort of introduced SURJ at a headline level. You've shared your stories of what's brought you into this principle of sustained action, right? Societal transformation only happens when we're in it, not for the flash, not for the protests, although they're fine. It's for the long haul, this word consistency that Nora keeps using. So we're going to take a short break. And when we get back, we're going to be talking in detail about actions that SURJ trains people to take, how they do what they do, how they help people come out of civic learned helplessness. So we'll be right back with Talk of the Bay. I'm Christine Barrington, and this is KSQD. Welcome back to Talk of the Bay. I'm Christine Barrington. My guests tonight are members of the organization Showing Up for Racial Justice, which calls on white people to get engaged and become accountable for ending racism in America. It started in the South in 2009, has over 200 chapters across the nation, and it brings folks in by offering a vision for a just, vibrant future where people of all races work together to win by building people power in multiracial communities through campaigns and deep local organizing. So now we're gonna talk about this people power, how you build people power to win, and what are some of the actions that y'all have been involved in. So yes, what are some of the local campaigns you've worked on? And what have they been like? Because I think it really helps people to hear, what is this work you're talking about? You want to start, Kathy?
Sure. Because I've only been local for a short time, I only have one, a sustained example, and it's culminating this Saturday. So,
okay. So you're here in Santa Cruz.
So I'm here. Yeah. I'm here in Santa Cruz County, and the Black Lives Matter mural was defaced 2 years ago, and there was a long judicial process with it. And so what SURJ listened to the Santa Cruz Equity Collab and said, hey, we'd like people to show up at the hearings. These are hard on us. And so we showed up there. When they asked for us to write letters to the DA, we would write letters. We would help mobilize people to come to when they came to the sentencing hearing, the courtroom overflowed, and we had the privilege to listen to people in the community who said how they were harmed by it. And so that was and then we were able to participate in the restorative justice actions that are happening as we speak. And I think you're going to learn more about that later this week.
Yes, on Wednesday's Talk of the Bay, Len B.A. will host Alaya Vautier and Abby Mustafa. Abby is the artist who painted the mural, and they're going to be talking about that restorative justice process, which I think's a really powerful thing for us to hear. This is how justice can go forth, right? Through partnership, through harm reduction, through understanding versus just throwing someone in jail. Yeah?
Correct.
Okay,
beautiful. And the repainting is this Saturday.
It's this Saturday. Beautiful. Okay. Angelee, do you have any stories about local actions that you've taken part in?
Well, one of the ways that I've been involved with SURJ is to be involved with the Amamutsin. And I know that SURJ Sacred Heart is also very connected with the Amamutsin tribal band. But it's... we try to get out to their events, to their protests. There's a they have their sacred land is in the southern Santa Cruz Mountains, and there's a corporation that bought some of that land and wants to put in an open pit mine to mine for sand and gravel. And we've been fighting that. And for example, when the draft environmental impact report came out last summer, our members and the community, and thousands of people, wrote comment letters in response to that environmental impact report, calling into question the conclusions that they were making, or pointing out the things that they had omitted. And so now apparently they've got the Santa Clara Planning Department, because it's officially in Santa Clara County, got 7,500 comment letters. So they have to respond to each one. So it's going to take a bit of time to get through that. But that's another example of a campaign that we've been involved in.
Beautiful. Thank you. So, such a valuable one to know about this long legacy in California. I mean, talk about not understanding the true history of the Native American genocide in California. We're not going to get into it right now, but I really only learned that in the past couple of years, and it really blew me away. So that's for another day. Thank you, Angelee. Nora, can you give an example of a local action you've been involved in and what it was like?
So one of the reasons I kind of jumped in head first with SURJ was because we were working on a police-free school campaign in partnership with the San Jose Unified Equity Coalition. San Jose Unified has, I think, 30,000 students or more, and the middle schools and high schools have SROs, or school resource officers, so cops on campus. And coming out of the racial uprisings, this group got organized, and it was actually came from three teachers who wrote a resolution that included removing police from the school, but also included calls for restorative justice, calls for ethnic studies, things that would make the school district safer and more vibrant for everyone. And I have been in education 13 years and never had a school resource officer. So I was very passionate about that, because I've seen that you can have schools that are safe and have that without cops. And I think so. What was it like? It was a year of weekly organizing meetings. It was multiple trips to the school board meetings and speaking. And one thing I want to name, you named like civic learned helplessness. Something that Lori and I were talking about together, but in preparing for this, was SURJ is an education in civic empowerment, and how civics work, and who has power, who are the decision makers, what can you do. I think when we think of taking action, we might picture the protest with the signs, but we might also picture, going to the board meeting and giving a little 1-minute speech. But also it was about thinking about I think it was five board members, where they each stood, where their values were, how their values aligned with the resolution that these teachers were trying to pass, how to either make it valuable for them to align, or too uncomfortable. It's all about like thinking about power and strategy, and that was something that was new to me in joining SURJ, and I think is, besides the work that we're doing and the vision that we want to get, it's also like a value for taking action in a group like SURJ.
Right. Like when I hear you describe that action, actually, I want to ask you a question first. I am imagining that some of our listeners out there who are white, right, they might be thinking, we've got all these school shootings.
Yes.
Why wouldn't we want a police officer, a peace officer in our schools? So could you explain why having a police person in the schools, why that can be a problem?
So starting from the school shooting and school safety perspective, studies have shown that having a police officer on campus does not, in a shooting situation, it hasn't made schools safer.
Okay.
And we've seen the inaction, if you just read the news, the inaction of police in these situations. And then when we have a police officer on campus, what tends to happen is students of color going through the disciplinary system tend to be referred from a discipline situation into the policing system. So we talk about something called the school to prison pipeline. And so it's like if you have a hammer, you're going to think you have a nail, right? But you need something else. You might need a saw. But if you have that tool available and it's right
or
there.
a pillow.
Yeah,
and a blanket.
Pillow. Thank you. Not a saw.
A pillow and a blanket in the school.
There you go. A juice box,
Yeah.
like school lunch, laundry facilities. Yes.
Beautiful. Okay. So I love describing weekly meetings, week in, week out, learning about your community, learning about the school board members. I call this, like, the two principles that I love to see in civic engagement is the building of kinship and then the piercing of the power structure, so we can put nourishment into it, good things into the power structure. And so it's building relationships. So knowing who these people are that are making decisions, like how can we connect with them? How can we reach them? How can we persuade them? How can we maybe create a little tension for them to think differently about this? So that's what I hear when I hear you describe that. So Lori, could you describe a local action you've been involved in and what it was like?
Sure. I agree. I think it's so important for people who maybe have never been involved in racial justice work to know that SURJ is a place where you can learn how to do it, how to do the work. And I think that is one thing that I'm so grateful for. Part of, a big part of my first few months in SURJ was really just educating myself. And I joined we had different issue groups in SURJ at Sacred Heart at the time, and I joined the decarceration group because I knew the least about our criminal justice system. I really didn't know about incarceration and how it affects people in our country. So I volunteered as part of that to help lead a workshop for the rest of our SURJ chapter on the history of policing in San Jose. In order to do that, I, along with my partner Anna at the time, who was also working on that, spent 2 months really doing a deep dive into reading articles, university papers, everything I could get my hands on about the history of policing, which was also a time of struggle for me, I would say, in coming to terms with that history, and lament, a time of lament for me. Out of that, though, I had a lot of new knowledge that I could share and then continue to learn. So it's ongoing learning. Because of of what I had learned, I participated in a campaign that SURJ joined in October of 2020. At that time, Silicon Valley Debug, which is a local organization led by people of color in San Jose, started the Care First Coalition. At that time, it was called the Care First Jail Last Coalition. And it was a coalition working to stop our county from spending $700 and something million on a new jail. So
$700 million.
Right.
And $100,000 per year to keep someone incarcerated.
Right. So through that process, we followed the leadership of Silicon Valley Debug, and that is something that is very, very core to the mission of SURJ. We do not start our own campaigns as white people. We follow accountability partners that are, as you mentioned before, led by people of color, who I would also add have been doing this work
for a
very, very long time. Mm-hmm. So the families that are a part of Silicon Valley Debug have loved ones who are either currently or formerly incarcerated. So those are the people closest to the problem, and those are the people who have the solutions. So we worked on that campaign because we feel like it's much better to spend $700 million on prevention and on alternatives.
And is that an ongoing thing, or did you actually stop the building of the jail?
We did stop the building of that jail.
Mm-hmm.
The first vote in 2020 was not in our favor. The second vote in 2022 was that jail, the building of that jail did get stopped. It will be an ongoing pursuit.
Of course, it's always ongoing. But it's a really interesting thing to think about. And I overheard you and Nora discussing this as I came into the station today, and it's really something to ponder. All of us as citizens, what's happening with our tax dollars? There's always this talk of like, that's too much money. We can't spend on this or that. But it's like, excuse me, we have almost $1 billion to spend, on a jail, and then $100,000 per year to keep someone incarcerated. And if we actually do the math, I think it would be it's easy to make the case that investing in people is much cheaper than incarcerating them. And yet people don't. I always feel like we were talking about church earlier, and I grew up in a pretty potent church environment, and we tithed 10%. I'm like my little piggy bank, and here's 10%, and you give it to the church. And it's supposed to be for people in need. And if we tithe our time, to change things, everything would change. All we need are more people showing up for something they're passionate about. And I heard you say something about being accountable. And I want to get to that. But first, in case you just tuned in and you're wondering, like, what am I listening to? First of all, you're listening to KSQD. And this is Talk of the Bay. I'm Christine Barrington. And my guests are all members of a racial justice organization called SURJ, Showing Up for Racial Justice. And it describes itself as a home for white people learning how to do this work because, the white culture has created this, and we are the biggest numbers, and we have often the most power in this country. We can do so much, but more importantly, we all of us need to show up. But this accountability to people of color who have been doing this work for a long time, they are knowledgeable. They know what's needed. I described to you in a prep call that I have a friend from Oakland. She's actually white, but she grew up in Oakland, and she was like, Christine, tell your friends and tell yourself, stop starting things and get out there and support your sisters of color. That's what she was, who are doing so much. And I'm like, good point. It's already happening. All we have to do is lend our effort and say, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Angelee, you're on the phone and I can't see you. So I want to check in with you. Do you have anything that you would like to say? What's going through you right now?
Well, I was just thinking about this issue of accountability, and how are we accountable to our partners in this work? And I think at SURJ Santa Cruz County, really, what we mostly do is show up. There's so much power in just showing up, just showing that you care, and that you're willing to do whatever needs to be done. That like yesterday, Kathy and I were at Cal Beach doing the volunteering for the Liberation Paddle Out by Black Surf Santa Cruz. And we were just helping people find where they were going and giving directions and picking up food and, just whatever needed to be done. And also keeping an eye out for anybody who might be disruptive and trying to stem that. Also answering questions, mostly from other white people, that they had about it. Why are there so many Black people on the beach today? And it's really, for me anyway, it's so lovely to just show up in service of others, who, like you said, are much more informed, much more knowledgeable, much more experienced in this realm. I'm very much still a learner, and but it's a joy to get to be a part of it and to get to practice just being humble, not having to always lead. And I just want to mention too, it's a training against all of the ways we've been conditioned. Like there's this white supremacy culture that exists, and we're all in it, and we were raised in it, and so we think it's good, but oftentimes there are elements of it that really get in our way when we're trying to work with others in a meaningful way.
Thank you, Angelee. And that's a perfect segue into maybe touching on the question of, when you've being in this work, what are some of the mistakes you've made, and how have you dealt with them in an empowered fashion? That's a leading question, but I'm a big believer in empowerment. And we learn so much. We have teachable moments. So what have some of your teachable moments in this work been?
Yeah, good question. I think I might pivot just a little bit to saying, hate the game, not the player. And so like that's
Beautiful.
an attitude we can all have when we're all seeing something we don't like either in ourselves or others, that approach it with curiosity. And I, to be honest, I'm still working on trying to put myself out there more, such that I will make the mistakes and I will get called in. And that's the reason to have the culture of calling in, is because we don't want to stay silent. We want to break through our discomfort, and we want to take action. So I am in one situation where it's a long drawn out one where I am being called in. I have a partner that's helping me understand what I need to learn from it.
Do you mean like an accountability partner, or do you mean like a partner in life, like your?
An accountability partner, a fellow white person, is
that part of SURJ? Is connecting people to become accountability partners, or is that just something y'all do on your own? Because now you and Nora have both mentioned that, and
I think at SURJ at Sacred Heart, we don't assign direct accountability buddies, but we have a culture of the newbies and the Scoobies. So newbies are sort of self that speaks for itself, but a Scooby is just someone who's been around longer. So we think about we're all on this anti-racist journey, and some of us have read more and learned more and done more, and it's just a process of looking to those people when we're new and learning from them along the way.
Yeah. It's like we all need support. I love to talk about having a challenge mindset, and there are many, many areas in our life where we need to grow. And so when I think about becoming anti-racist and our whole society dealing with this, and we can get really down on white people for how they're not showing up. And then I like to remind myself, it's the system. So you said hate the game, not the person. Our system prevents us from even showing up to save the planet on which we live. So this is bigger. And so coming out of this kind of narcolepsy that the system breeds, and just leaning forward, the zombie, and leaning forward and having a challenge mindset and making it fun. The more I lean in and the more I bump up against what I don't know, the more I can grow, the more effective I can be, which then leads to, what we can gain from doing this work. Right. And so, and I kind of jumped into a whole new topic, but does anybody else want to talk about a teachable moment? Does anybody have a specific story that they're this is a good one, I've had a teachable moment, or do we want to move on to talk about what we can gain from doing this work?
I have one.
Okay.
It's a pretty simple one. But when I was watching that film at church, White Like Me, there was one person that Tim Weiss was interviewing, an African-American scholar, and the way she talked about it made it very understandable and relatable. And afterwards, I made the comment to our pastor, who's an African-American woman, that she was so articulate. I found that she was very articulate. And then later, years later, not in that moment, but I realized that comment is something that Black people hear a lot, and there's sort of a subtext that goes along with it, which is I was expecting that, and therefore I'm commenting on it because I was not expecting this person to be that eloquent, which is horrifying when I realized it, and but a very teachable moment.
Thank you so much. That's a great one that happens often, like you said. And being able to talk about it, I just feel embracing our teachable moments. I hate the word mistake, embracing these moments where we're like, oh, look at that. Like, a lot of people feel resistant to saying like, I'm not racist. And what I always said is, how could I not be? I grew up in this culture. We all are, and the truth will set you free. Right? The truth will set you free. And so in the couple of minutes we have left, boy, did we have a lot of questions we wanted to go over, but I think that we've hit on some really important points here. How do you nourish and sustain yourself doing this work? Like, for instance, to really educate ourselves. Like I was saying, I've been going through this education process too, very particularly in learning about Indigenous history. And Lori, earlier you used this word, I believe, like devastation and lament. This, to really get a grip on what's really been happening in this country is so devastating. And then to stay engaged in the work can, it's a marathon. So how do you take care of yourselves?
I think that's why we have to do and learn. We have to read and go to our book circle, and we have to do something so that we feel that power and that thing that at least I tried, or I stepped up, or I showed up. One thing with SURJ at Sacred Heart is we really name that relationships. Our lead organizer's name is Jen, and she says relationships are what sustain us when the burning white hot outrage subsides. And so we think about all the hundreds and thousands of people that showed up in May 2020, and to be honest, our chapter has shrunk some, and it's relationships. So Lori is now one of my closest friends, and we would not have connected. We're decades apart in age.
Right.
Hey, hold on there. No, I'm kidding.
But that's what sustains us is having a team.
Yeah.
Having a team that you can show up or make space or take space and say, I need this, or I'm going to be out, and what can I do and how can I help? It's being part of a team that sustains me.
Kinship. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. Relationship is key, both within SURJ and with our accountability partners as well, because we do this work with so many people. And what Angelee was talking about, being humble, I actually try to use the word making mistakes because I think that in our white culture, at least I learned that making mistakes was not okay. And so part of dismantling that is saying, hey, it's okay to make mistakes. We are going to make mistakes. We've probably made mistakes on this radio show and how we're talking about racism.
Sure.
We will continue to make mistakes. And I think especially as, at least for me as a white person, I love that SURJ invites us to make mistakes as we continue to act, right? I'm not going to stop taking action because I made a mistake. I'm going to continue to take action. I'm going to learn from it, and be okay with making mistakes. And that's definitely something that I have to repeat to myself, and I want to welcome others into that as well. So for me, it's that, and it's also something that Nora touched on, is that knowing that we're part of the community, even when we have to take a break and step back.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that we're not a part of this racial justice movement. It's that when we know we need to take a break, we do. And those team members will continue. And when we can come back, we will.
Beautiful. So we're going to need to wrap up. And I have the sense that it would be really rewarding to touch back in with SURJ as more local actions happen, and including the ones over at Sacred Heart in San Jose, because those do involve the Amamutsan and many worthwhile programs, right? We need to band together. And so I would love to have you back on Talk of the Bay. And so before we go, how can people find you?
So you can find SURJ Santa Cruz County on social media, Instagram and Facebook. You can find our website, surjsantacruzcounty.org. We have a Cultivating Care that happens once a month, so you can go to surjsantacruzcounty.org and find us there. It's a drop-in place for white allies to fight their white supremacy and find that community. There's a anti-racist book club happening starting in July with the Santa Cruz Public Library System. So you can go to their website or the Resource Center for Nonviolence to find that.
Beautiful. And so I will have show notes up for this particular show with the recording of the show on our show notes pages tomorrow. It will be put up with all kinds of links, and you can learn more about SURJ and you can join the movement if the show inspired you. We thank you for listening. Thank you to my guests, Angelee, Nora, Kathy, Lori. Thank you so much for taking the time, for teaching me about your work, and I look forward to having you back on the show soon. And next is First Person Singular.